Picture this. The journey ahead starts here together, and together we can build a brighter future. You are listening to Illuminating Hope, a podcast of Hope House. Welcome to the Illuminating Hope podcast. I'm your host, Tina Johnson, Community Partnership Manager, alongside my co-host, Marianne Matheny, CEO of Hope House. And for Mental Health Awareness Month, we would like to highlight two of our therapists here at Hope House, Hannah and Elizabeth. Hannah earned her master's degree in clinical counseling from Emporia State University. Over the past 3 years, she's been a dedicated member of Hope House team, initially serving as a permanent housing advocate. Apart from her professional pursuits, Hannah finds joy in baking and staying active, whether it's hitting the gym or preparing for her next 10K run. Elizabeth is a seasoned therapist specializing in adult counseling here at Hope House. With a compassionate approach, Elizabeth is dedicated to enhancing the well-being of her clients through applications of evidence-based methodologies. With 5 years of hand-on experience in domestic violence, Elizabeth provides education on domestic violence and trauma to survivors and the wider community. Elizabeth and Hannah, welcome to the Illuminating Hope podcast. I'm so happy you're here.
Thank you. Yes, thank you for inviting us.
Can you share a little bit of background? And Elizabeth, I'll start with you. A little bit of background and why you became so interested in mental health therapy.
Well, it did start when I was a child. My mom was obsessed with Law & Order SVU, and so I loved Dr. Wong, and I thought his job was the coolest thing in the world. And so I really wanted to do that growing up. And then I had my own life experiences, and I kind of went through this phase where I was like, oh, I wouldn't be able to do that. And then I had a really great therapist through Moxa who really encouraged me, and I learned so much about mental health through my own experiences and my time with my therapist. And I was like, oh my gosh, I should just keep on doing it.
And Hannah, what about you?
Mine is mainly because of my childhood. I had a pretty rough childhood growing up. I felt that this was a way that I could help others from experiencing what I went through in a way. And I actually had a therapist at a previous domestic violence shelter that I worked at that pretty much inspired me and pushed me to do this, and I don't think I would have done it without her.
What are some of the most common mental health challenges you encounter in your practice when working with domestic violence survivors?
I often have clients that think that they're a burden, that will say to me, I'm nervous about talking about all this and putting this all on you right now, like they're worried about me. And so I always explain to them I spent a lot of money to sit in this chair, but a lot of them feel like burdens. A lot of them have where their families had told them not to go to therapy because they didn't want family secrets to be out, children's division being involved, and those type of things, or they've been gaslit so much into not believing their own feelings, so they don't even trust that their feelings are real, and they feel that they are like lying.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with Elizabeth, and I think a lot of our clients deal with low self-worth due to being in a domestic violence relationship where you're constantly told you suck, they are belittled all the time, and so they don't feel that they even are worthy of getting the help that they desperately need.
I think one of the other things that comes to mind for me is that they're not believed. If you experience that on a regular basis, you tell your story, you talk to people, and they're all like, well, you're still in this relationship, so you're crazy. There's something wrong with you. And you hear that over and over from people who are supposed to be supporting you, whether your coworkers, your friends, family, whomever, besides the abusive partner saying those things too. And that's something I feel like we've had to address within this movement as well. When I started as the therapist many moons ago, I had people within the movement saying that it was wrong that I even was here because it was just putting a label on survivors that they were crazy. Instead of looking at it as an opportunity to deal with the trauma that you've been through, to be able to have someone safe to talk to about the experiences you've had, the label was, oh, then people will think she's crazy or he's crazy. We have to fight that as well.
I agree. What are some of the therapeutic approaches or modalities that you specialize in, and why?
Well, Hannah and I both do is CBT, so that's cognitive behavioral therapy. So we look a lot at how our beliefs about ourselves impact our behavior. behavior. So like maybe a negative belief about yourself is that I am dumb. So if you believe that you're dumb, you may not want to apply for a job that you really are interested in. If you believe that if you're dumb, you may not finish school. One of my favorite modalities is internal family systems. We talk a lot about the different parts about ourselves. We talk about exiles, and that's the traumatic parts of ourselves, and managers. Those are the parts of us that are not trying to keep our exiles from being triggered. And then same with our firefighters, which those would be like those more unhealthy ways of coping, like drinking, drugs. Hannah and I actually finished our EMDR training together. So movement, desensitization, reprocessing. And that one we really enjoy doing because you're able to take a negative core belief that a person has about themselves that's been stuck on one part of the brain that also impacts their behavior, and you're able to use eye movement or tapping in order to move it around to the other part of the brain so you're able to process it. And it's really so interesting to sit with clients and watch them go through this process. You can see in their faces, and sometimes they'll start yawning because your brain is doing so much work, and they'll continue processing outside of the therapy room. So that's always really great.
That's interesting.
And usually by the time they leave, something that's giving them high anxiety for such a long period of time and impacted a lot of the decisions that they've made, they may feel calmer or less anxious about it. And then currently right now I'm doing a training on integrative medicine and nutrition for PTSD with another therapist here, Taylor, and that has been a wonderful ride. I love that. So.
Well, yeah, like Elizabeth said, we did the EMDR training, and that's honestly something I'm focusing on the most right now because it is so fresh in my mind. I actually just started the first EMDR session yesterday with a client, so laying out the groundwork, working on grounding techniques, creating that container and that peaceful place for her whenever she's dysregulated in between sessions, she can utilize those skills. It's been very fascinating to learn it. I mean, I have high hopes for my clients utilizing it, and I think they will start to see some major shifts in their thinking.
Do art therapy projects with clients quite often. We do crochet with each other. We do paint pouring, collages, and all those types of things. Recently, I did a workshop with clients where we had a piece of construction paper and we did past, present, and future. The question was asked to them, how has your trauma affected how you looked at your past, present, and future? And they did like collages with magazines or like colored and stuff, and it was so great to see everybody's creativity. And then we did self-portraits where we chose different colors that we felt like represented us and made us feel safe, and paint poured onto a canvas. It was so exciting because these are shelter clients, and so they have their first piece of artwork from place, yeah, and in their shelter room right now. So it was pretty fun.
Can you talk about what goes into your decision making in terms of what modality you would use? A person comes to you for the first time. Kind of talk through what you do in order to determine what's the best course that you can help this person with.
Usually a lot of history taking first with clients, like listening to their background and then hearing how they feel about themselves. If I hear a lot of negative connotations, then that's when I decide like whether or not to use EMDR. If I'm doing a lot of trauma education, then I do IFS, internal family systems, where we talk about the different parts of us, and I like to utilize those together. If it's like a shorter session or just like seeing a client like first come in, we can do something like CBT. I like to do EMDR and IFS because my clients in the shelters don't stay as long. I try to do as much without overwhelming them. Trauma education, domestic violence education, and processing that we can do there before they move on.
And Hannah, with you, I know you work with a lot of clients who are still within that relationship. So would your assessments be any different? Your approach? Do you have to safety plan more?
I would say safety planning more for sure, because a lot of my clients are still within that relationship, and I don't think necessarily it changes the way that I choose a modality with them, but I do, like Elizabeth, do a lot of history taking and try to figure out the best course of action to take. So if I have a client who struggles a lot with emotional regulation, so I want to do DBT with her, and that is a modality that works with mindfulness and emotional regulation and distress tolerance, and just being able to find ways for that client to regulate themselves on their own and in a manner that they can do anywhere. They can utilize those skills, like if they're at the grocery store and they get triggered or activated, they have those tools to utilize.
therapies. I would also say just in general, getting to know the client and what their likes and dislikes are and who they are and like their experiences too. If I have a client that struggles with disassociation, I may wait on EMDR or I may do it very contained and restricted with them. But if they're a client that's really creative and right-brained, then we may do like a lot of different art therapies.
And I think it also depends on the client too. Like you could start a modality with them and they might not be receptive to it and they might not pick up on it and they might not like it. And so that's when you're like, okay, let's try something else. So it's going to be different with every client and how they process things.
We don't require anybody to participate in our services. All that we do is voluntary. You know, Elizabeth, you working with people in shelter, just having left the relationship, and then Hannah, you with people more outreach. Can you talk about whether you see that people have experienced therapy in the past, or is this all new to them? Do you do a lot of education? When we talk about the different services that we provide, I think this area is one that people have the most questions about and really trying to understand it and what the process is. I think it's important for us to just kind of share that this is all voluntary, so people are choosing to participate in these services.
I love that question. A lot of time when we're history taking, we do ask if they've been through therapy or anything like that before. Oftentimes we'll have clients who were in foster care, in state custody growing up, so they've done some sort of therapy. Some of them did not have very good experiences and it felt forced at that time for them. So it's a little iffy for them when they first start therapy or they're really nervous about it. Other clients have no idea what therapy is. They don't know what you do. They think you just sit there and just like talk to each other and then, oh my God, everything is amazing now. And it is a lot of work. You have to be pretty brave to start therapy, especially these clients who have been through, anybody's brave to start therapy, but I mean these clients who have been told that there's something wrong with them for such a long time, and it's usually starting before the abuse and really challenging themselves because it's work. It's not just talking. You have to do things in the session, outside the session in order for you to really go through that healing journey. A lot of people have worries about starting in. Sometimes it's scary to talk about those things. And what is this therapist going to think about me? Am I being a burden? Am I talking too much? Am I even doing this therapy right? So there's a lot of different things, and I just think it's important to guide them and just meet them where they are at. And if they don't want to talk about something, I always tell my clients, we can talk about your favorite color. We can talk about pink all day. This is your session. You're in control of it.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I always tell my clients that you are strong and you're courageous for even taking this step because it is hard and it's going to be a lot of work, but you're worth it. And I do have clients that have never been to therapy before, and I have clients who have been. And I think it's beautiful if either way, I'm starting this journey with you, and if they have been to therapy before, it's a great time to be asking those questions. What did you like or what did you not like from your previous therapist? And it gives me more of a view of like how I'm going to direct them.
What would your response be, Elizabeth, if somebody came into shelter and the abuse was intense in front of the children? It was all about leaving for the children, not necessarily for their own safety. So I want therapy for the children. I don't need therapy. Don't worry about me. Have you heard this before? And what's your response?
Yeah, that happens quite often. Clients that are in domestic violence, they are the strongest people you will ever meet. An abuser who wants power and control isn't going to go for somebody that doesn't have power and control. They're going to go for the strongest person. So these people are most clients are really struggling to even admit, to feel that they are a failure and all these things. And I'm a part of hurting my children. That's really hard, especially when you're doing everything you can possible to help them. When clients come in and they just want therapy for their children, okay, if that's what you want, that's fine. You don't have to do therapy. We have groups that are therapeutic, but they're really informal. They're really fun. Some of them we just like talk, eat snacks, share recipes, listen to music, and do art therapy and stuff, and even just like a break from their kids. So they're doing a little bit of healing without necessarily having to sit there and discuss all the trauma. If they're not ready to do that, they don't have to. And honestly, if a client doesn't even want to do that, I always say hi to them. I always like welcome into my office. Some clients come, they don't want therapy, but they come in my office in the morning and we'll get coffee or tea, snacks, or they'll just be like, oh my gosh, this happened today. Can you believe it? And I'm like, that's great. So, or, that stinks. So,
So just building that relationship is
building
huge.
that relationship. Sometimes you're going to have clients that are not receptive to therapy, and that's fine. And sometimes all that you can do is just show them unconditional acceptance and love and compassion, and that's where they're at right now, and that's what they need right now. now from you, and that's what you give them.
Is that pretty parallel with the outreach clients that you work with as well?
Yeah, definitely. And just like Elizabeth said earlier, like meeting them where they are. If they're not ready, my door is always open. I have a client who, well, she actually comes to me for therapy, but sometimes if she's around, she'll stop in and we'll chat just to see how her week is going and stuff like that. And I think the support groups are helpful if the client isn't quite ready for therapy, but they can come and enjoy the groups. And I think it's like a foot in. This is not so scary to think about, but I think it is still a good space for them to be connected with others who are going through a similar situation.
I think that makes so much sense when you think about what happens in a therapeutic relationship where you have a person sharing their innermost secrets and thoughts and feelings and being incredibly vulnerable. You have to make sure that that person that you're talking to is someone you trust, someone you like, that you feel like can be helpful to you. And that isn't just going to happen just because you're in this position and they're in this location. I mean, that's where I think that just makes a lot of sense, that if any of us want to go get therapy, we're going to have to go find someone and make sure that we connect with that person. And so I really think that that's important, that we do that we give people the opportunity to feel comfortable to decide whether you are a trustworthy person for me to share my innermost thoughts and be incredibly vulnerable with. So.
I think the rapport building is huge for therapists. Without it, that client is not going to be in that vulnerable state where they can feel like they can share all of these deep, dark things with. I've had clients tell me, well, I've never told anyone this before. I feel so special when someone tells me something like that. Confidentiality is so important to them, and I remind them again, like, okay, I know you just shared something really important, and I want you to know that that stays here. So just like reassuring them that it's confidential.
Making sure they have that ultra safe space.
One of the very first things that goes when someone's in a domestic violence relationship, there's no trust. There's no one that says, I have your back, I'm supporting you. It's all, I'm controlling you. You are within my power. There isn't any of that standing next to them and supporting them in what they're going through. So I think that's an incredibly important part of what we do.
How would you, when you're talking to a client, you recognize maybe some healthy coping strategies and some unhealthy coping strategies? How would you approach this subject even with a client?
I always ask them, what do you do typically when you're feeling overwhelmed? Because I think a lot of clients have coping skills that they don't really think are coping skills. And so I like to get an idea of what they already do now. And then I've had clients who have been open with their unhealthy coping skills, and they're like, I have issues with alcohol. And in my mind, I'm like, that's an unhealthy coping skill. But how do you get your client to recognize that? So I think that just asking them how they feel after utilizing the skill.
Oh, that's fantastic.
So like with a healthy coping skill, usually the goal is that you're going to feel better. Now, the unhealthy coping skill can also give you that same feeling, but for a short period of time because it's just a fix. And then after the happiness goes away, what are you left with? And so I think that's the feelings that they have to be able to communicate. Like, feel guilty or I feel shameful for what I just did. And to me, that makes me think that that's not a very healthy coping skill to have.
And one thing that I talk about with clients is like those unhealthy coping skills. They're typically ones that borrow from tomorrow. So you may take a little...
Say that again for the people in the back.
Those unhealthy coping skills are borrowing from tomorrow. If you're drinking, if you're using drugs, if you're doing self-harm, that's going to impact you to tomorrow. You're going to be tired. You're going to have to hide any self-harm things that you've done. You're going to have to do a little bit more lying. It's a little more exhausting. Whereas those healthy coping skills, I can tell you like, oh my gosh, I wrote in my journal, and that's going to be okay. And I do think that sometimes healthy coping skills, they're not as immediate feeling, and so that's why it's kind of difficult to start with to work on. And I always tell my clients, your healthy coping skill, you can't just use it when you're having anxiety or when you're having a panic attack. It has to be practiced every single day. It's like a football game or going to the Super Bowl. Travis Kelce did not make it to the Super Bowl by just walking there. He had to practice every single day in order to get there. And so if you think of your panic attack like the Super Bowl of all mental health, you want to have that practice. You want those skills. And it's just easier to bring up and to utilize if you've had a lot of practice. Yes.
I actually said that to a client the other day when we were talking about grounding techniques. I was like, you have to utilize these even when you're not in panic, because you have to be able to practice and be able to utilize it in the moment of panic. Because when we're panicking, your brain is all over the place. You're not going to think of that, consciously. So you just have to be able to practice it enough to where it's just normal to use it.
When you're in panic mode, your thinking brain, your frontal lobe turns off. The parts of your brain that are working are your limbic system, where the amygdala is, where the smoke detector is, and then the brain stem. And so to put words into our emotions, we have to wake up our thinking brain. And so in order to do that, you have to be able to observe and notice what's going on around you. So utilizing the 5 senses, different breathing skills and things like that, you have to be able to bring that up for you when you're having those moments. And you need them like in your pocket so you're ready to go. Otherwise, like Hannah said, it can feel like your brain is all over the place.
Thinking about what you guys were saying, I was thinking, it's just so much easier to pick up a drink or do some drugs.
Right.
And then you can just escape. You can avoid.
Yeah.
And you don't have to think, which feel like that in the moment, but then obviously you're borrowing from tomorrow. But the other coping skills take work. You have to practice them. You have to learn them. You have to remember them. From my perspective, it's just easier to go to the non-healthy ones than it is to go through the other.
Yeah, and it's also easier to not go to therapy.
Exactly.
Because you're not putting in the work.
Yeah.
So to be able to get to a point where you don't have to utilize that unhealthy coping skill, it takes a lot more work and it's exhausting. And I think that's why a lot of people give up.
It's
like
scary.
this
it's
isn't
scary.
working for me, and I don't know why. So let me go back to what I know that does work.
And also, along with all these coping skills, you have to have the support to do them.
Right.
If you're a person who is struggling with drinking or drugs, and you know that if you hang around a certain person or certain people or do a certain thing, you're more likely to pick that up instead of work on your emotions in that moment. With these coping skills, you also have to have the right support with you. Because if you're having somebody that a friend that you're calling in is like, hey, have you done your breathing? Have you done your journaling? And somebody that you can be vulnerable with like that, and then you can tell them the same thing. Whereas like, oh my gosh, I'm calling my best friend. I've had such a bad day. Girl, let's go get some cocktails. It sounds so much fun in the moment. But again, you're borrowing from tomorrow, and you're still going to have these emotions and feelings. Unfortunately, your brain doesn't stay off forever. It's going to turn back on. It's going to be even more difficult because then you have the extra anxiety that's brought on by chemicals and substances.
What are some practical self-care practices that you can share with our listeners to incorporate in their daily lives for their mental health?
I always say, almost kind of what we were just talking about, it has to be a daily thing, is if you know you're going to have a really rough week coming up, go ahead and meal prep or wake up 10 minutes earlier. Self-care isn't just like taking a bath and putting a hot rag on your head or whatever you do. It is also making your life easier the next day too. Okay, I know I'm going to have to walk the dog at this time. I'll wake up 10 minutes early so I can get myself going, or I'll do the dishes before I go to bed so then I don't see, because I know having a messy house makes me anxious. And then also just like breathing techniques. I love 4-4-4 breaths I do with clients. You breathe in for 4, hold for 4, breathe out for 4. The eye roll, you inhale while looking up and then exhale looking down. I love that one because it's like kind of sassy. It's like,
Indeed.
I'm not rolling my eyes at you, I'm breathing. So little things like that. But I always say whatever is going to make your life easier the next day, so then you can be like, all right, now I have 5 minutes to do a body scan and check how I'm feeling.
Yeah, I don't think it has to be some luxurious 2-hour bubble bath. A lot of self-care is just being present and being mindful. Even like when you're doing the dishes and you hate doing the dishes, but just like feel the water and feel the bubbles. Just try to remain present, and making your life easier is so helpful too. The breathing techniques are something you can do at any time.
Today, it seems like it's so hard to be present in the moment. I found myself at my daughter's graduation ceremony that they have, and I didn't take any pictures or anything like that or videos because I wanted to be present in the moment. And I think so much today, everything's so Instagram, everything's so TikTok, and not many people realize their bubbles in dishwater. So I think that's a very, very valid point.
And it's easy crazy to do when you think about what's all going on in our world. And then you add domestic violence on top of that.
Yes.
Going back to what you said earlier, Elizabeth, I have said for the last 33 years, domestic violence survivors are the strongest people I've ever met. And you don't live through and survive that kind of trauma and terrorism if you don't have inner strength. And you get things at you 24 hours a day. You're being pummeled with images and words and crisis, and to come in and have domestic violence on top of that.
And we have to remember, too, these survivors, they may have picked up these unhealthy coping skills as a survival. Like, if I'm drinking and I'm numb, then this bruise isn't going to hurt as bad. I can move on. I can get up, get the kids ready and going to school, isolate from others, then nobody will notice anything. If I lose a sense of who I am, then I don't have to be as sad about missing that person. And then that is all helpful, like, in that relationship. But once you're out, these things are really damaging. It's almost like learning to walk again.
Right.
Like, you have to learn how to be you again, and that is so emotionally overwhelming.
Yes, I have had clients that have told me they don't know who they are. I've had clients that have been with, their abuser for the last 7 years, so they have no sense of self anymore. They have been part of this relationship, and that's been their identity.
Yeah. Going to the grocery store and picking out what you're going to have for dinner for yourself can be overwhelming. Even choosing, like, what your favorite color is, if you like soda or not, that it can be emotionally overwhelming. And sometimes in the session, we're talking about, wait, let's sit down and think, what do you like? My favorite part of when people leave is, especially when they're getting new places after shelter, is like, what's your vibe gonna be? Like, looking on Pinterest with the client, like, are you boho chic? Are you gonna paint all the walls black? Like, that is, like you said, losing a sense of yourself. And I think one of the most empowering things you can do after that relationship is find who you are and then some.
And don't settle.
Yeah, don't settle.
Going back to that you have to then trust yourself that you're going to make the right decision. And I think that's part of that recovering from domestic violence is you've been lost. Now you found yourself, and then trusting yourself to be able to do all of that again.
I think trust is huge for a person after a toxic relationship, and I've told clients, like, I think toxic relationships are hard, but the healthy one after a toxic relationship is also hard, because you are bringing with you all these unhealthy coping skills and thoughts about yourselves, and you're hypervigilant, and you don't know if you can trust the other person. Learning to put those walls down and trust yourself that you're making the right decisions is super hard.
And do you teach the difference between healthy and unhealthy boundaries? I know when I remarried, I have boundaries that are so firm, they will not come down, and they're healthy. They're very healthy boundaries. And then I have some that I'll flex with. Do you teach the boundary concept?
Oh, yeah, all the time. We're constantly talking about boundaries. It's so interesting being in shelter because everybody has really different boundaries there. And sometimes, and you see this a lot of times in court too, with working with clients, they are learning boundaries, are like, wow, this feels really great. And then it's like everything turns into a boundary. It's almost like over the top. And it's like, all right, I'm so glad that you are able to do this now. I don't know. That one might be a little wild there. But and everybody has different boundaries and what feels good to them, what they want in their yard, what they don't want in their yard. I think a lot of times clients will actually know what their boundaries are and not what they like. It's about implementing them is really difficult for them because, okay, last time I said no, I was raped, I was beaten, I was this, I was that. So say, I know that I don't like this, but also, is it safe? So again, back to working on trusting yourself. There's a lot of different barriers to even set a boundary.
Yes, I've had clients tell me that they don't want to feel like a jerk for saying no. Growing up in a toxic environment, people pleasing is a huge thing. And just feeling like you always have to make other people happy. Or you're a bad friend, or a bad mom, or a bad sister. And it's hard, and it's kind of like the coping skills. You have to practice. So strong boundaries and like being okay with saying no, especially if it's at your own expense. Like you can't pour from an empty cup. Like you have to be able to have your own fulfillment in life.
And setting boundaries for the first time and saying no first time does not feel good.
No.
It is not this glorious moment where this light is shining. It feels, you're going to feel guilty, but you're going going to have to do it feeling guilty. You're going to have to do it feeling uncomfortable. Like Hannah just said, that practice, you will get more comfortable with it. You'll be more confident in it. But nobody expects you to be an expert and feeling good right after saying no for the first time ever.
Yeah, and you can't grow in your comfort zone.
Oh.
You have to be pushed out of that comfort zone to be able to grow.
And that's where you come in to advocate, educate, then you are empowering that survivor, just like we do here at Hope House.
Thinking about all of that we just talked about, what do you do to take care of yourself? Because this work is hard, especially when you're hearing the stories day after day after. You know, as a leader of this organization, it's really important to me that staff are taking care of themselves and doing what they need to do, because this work is really hard.
I think having a good support system, like outside of work, is important to be able to just like being there for me after I've had a tough day, or even within our clinical department, like we have support with each other because they know what it's like. If anyone knows what it's like, it's them. And so I like that I'm able to lean on them, and we have supervision every week, so that's a space for us to express those hard times. But outside of here, I try to be active as much as I can. I just did a 10K a couple weeks ago, so trying to apparently become a runner. So, but I think exercise is great for our mental health, so I've been trying to incorporate that as much as I can.
Elizabeth, I want to direct this question to you. Tell me, what is secondary trauma and any stories or experiences you've had in relation to secondary trauma?
I love that question, Tina. One thing I do want to mention is jobs in social work or counseling, even teaching, nursing. Those are all adrenaline rushing jobs. So all day you can have a spike in adrenaline just from crisis, from a lot of paperwork, from anything that's going on throughout the day. Stories that you're hearing, interventions that you're putting in. You can have adrenaline all day long, and then at home you may often experience like a crash, and you are trying your best to self-regulate, but it's so hard. You can have like foggy brain, you can feel almost sickly, very tired, and it's like, how do I get my body to self-regulate? That's why a lot of the times like people start using drinking, like maybe I'll just have one glass of wine to kind of ease me out. Eventually that becomes 2, 3, 4, and that happens with drugs, and that happens to a lot of mental health professionals and people who work in shelters and things like that. And I think it really needs to be discussed and talked about. And so with secondary trauma, we find ourselves not being able to cope with those things, or there's not a lot of people you can go home and discuss those things with, debrief with, or anything like that. So something that I have found helpful is once I pull in the driveway, my day is done. And the whole way home, I can be thinking about stuff, I can be worried about it, but once I'm home, that day is done. Or I will leave things until the next day. Also, sometimes it's best to just say no. You don't have to answer every single phone call from a friend or family member. I ignore my mom all the time. Saying those things. And also, secondary trauma has really impacted me in several ways. One story that I have is maybe 2 years ago. After work one day, I went and met my husband at a steakhouse with some of his coworkers. And it was a steakhouse. I don't eat steak. I'm a vegan. But they all got steaks, and so the servers brought out knives, like these huge knives to cut things, and everybody's like grabbing them, like getting ready to eat. And my first thought is like, oh my gosh, what if somebody stabs somebody here? Or has anybody used these knives to self-harm? And that's that secondary trauma where you're constantly still in that crisis mode.
Because you do a lot of safety planning with your clients, and so that's where that would come from.
Yes, exactly. So your brain is constantly thinking about those things. So it's really important for mental health professionals to be aware of those secondary trauma symptoms, and then also not to be ashamed by them. I think shame really like kind of puts us in this very lonely place where we have to be strong all the time, and like these things can't affect me because I have all the knowledge and tools. Well, we also, like our clients, have to implement those things for it to work and for us to be better for our clients and for ourselves, our families.
I really have enjoyed the different things that you've been doing with clients, and encouraging other staff to join as well, which I think is wonderful, to be able to do things together. The garden, the paint, the crocheting, all of those things. There are so many ways to build relationships and to be able to help someone work through their trauma. It doesn't have to be you just sit down and do talk therapy, that you can do other things. I love that you guys are exploring that more and seeing what works and how it's been effective for our clients.
We had, not that long ago, somebody donated donated a ton of fruit to Hope House. So much fruit. It was insane. Obviously, they had those for lunches and saved a lot of it. Taylor and I had a juicing group we did for clients, and we wrote out like what different foods and fruits and stuff are good for different parts of your body, your mental health, and everything like that. We had such a fun time. It was super messy, but we cleaned it up, I swear. And it was so fun seeing one of my clients. She, then after that, because we talked a lot about nutrition, she had digestive issue, and we talked about that issue and how it comes from trauma. And so she had her turmeric and ginger water, and she'd walk around with it every day, and I was so proud of her. And she did report having less digestive symptoms.
Yeah, I actually utilized some of that group, and I incorporated a healthy eating group for Hawthorne, actually. We did smoothies last week, and I was able to talk about each ingredient and how it helps our body. The funny thing is, after my clients started drinking the smoothie, they gave me a face because it wasn't sweet enough. I thought it was plenty sweet. You know, we had bananas in there, it's a natural sweetener, but it did kind of open my eyes to the access that our clients, you know, don't have. They've never had the opportunity maybe to drink something with wholesome ingredients in it. And so even though they turned a face, I'm going to keep doing it. And so that education is there about how these foods affect our body and our mental health.
And they'll grow a palate for it too.
Yeah, I hope so.
Oh, I think so.
And it just you feel like you're doing something. You feel like you're in control of something. Like we talk about breathing and all that stuff, and that's so amazing. I am doing something right now that's going to help my brain. I'm eating a blueberry that is going to help my focus and my brain. It's like an action, and that can be empowering.
Marian, I know you're welling up with pride, just like I am right now at the two therapists that were very much so. And I can tell you that knowing all of you therapists, you are some of the best in the business, and our clients are so fortunate to have you. So tell our listeners, if they need resources, what to do.
All right. If you need resources from Hope House or just have questions, you can always call our hotline at 816-461-HOPE. We can help you, refer you into therapy. You can have court advocacy. You can get an ex parte. You can explore our groups. There's a lot of different things that we can help you with, and you can just call with questions. And one really important thing to know when you're calling the Hope House hotline is, besides our advocates answering are amazing, is that you don't have to leave the relationship. We're not going to tell you what to do. If you just want to have a session and be like, does this stuff apply to me? This relationship, these things are making me uncomfortable. Is this domestic violence? You can do that. You do not have to be actively leaving, and we will work with you even if you choose to stay. What we care most about is your safety and your children's safety if you have any, and your pets. So give us a call if you have any questions or need anything from us.
And there's also a mental health crisis line, 988. So if you are having a crisis and there's thoughts of, suicidal ideations, please call that number and they can help you. In the meantime, like she said, call us as well.
I think it's really important that you talked about that we don't tell people what to do. We don't make decisions for people. We really are there as guides and support systems to what decisions that each person's making, and depending on that person and depending on their circumstances, we'll decide what's best for them. And we are there to offer guidance, offer education, offer support, just so that they can then make their own decisions.
Elizabeth, Hannah, you and your therapy team are second to none, and I thank you so much for being on today.
Thank you
Yes,
so
thank
much.
you so much.